Up on Talking Points, Governor Andrew Cuomo has released his proposed New York budget for 2021. What's there could drastically change election security.
And the impeachment trial has gone into full swing where things stand 6 days in.
And a deadly virus from China is prompting an international health crisis. How world leaders are responding. Talking Points starts right now. Buffalo area Republicans have selected their candidate for a special election in New York's 27th congressional district. Good evening, I'm Sabrina Maggiore.
And I'm Conor Wight. State Senator Chris Jacobs has been tapped by the local Republican committees for the race. The election is to replace Chris Collins, who was just sentenced to 26 months in prison for insider trading. It is expected he'll run against 2018 Democratic nominee Nate McMurray.
The election itself has not been scheduled yet. However, many anticipate it will be held on April 28th. That's the same day as the New York presidential primary.
Now, continuing with New York elections, campaign transparency has been one of Governor Cuomo's outspoken initiatives, and last week he outlined a new act meant to safeguard New York elections. Our Jishnu Nair joins us in studio to break it all down. Jishnu?
Thanks, guys. The act bans foreign influence corporations from making political contributions statewide. Foreign nationals are already banned from making campaign contributions by national and state law. However, the Federal Election Commission says that a U.S. corporation that is owned by a foreign corporation may sponsor a separate fund for campaign contributions. Prior to last week's announcement, New York had no legislation directly targeting foreign influence corporations. Now, this proposal is a continuation of the governor's 2016 5-point ethics plan. The specifics of the bill go as such. If a single foreign entity owns more than 5% of the corporation, it will be banned. If corporations have more than 10% of ownership by 2 or more foreign entities, they will also be banned. And lastly, the proposal will ban campaign spending if more than 10% of a corporation's board members are foreign nationals. Now, campaign finance has also been a concern for other states. Last year, Montana introduced a bill that tackles foreign-owned shell companies or businesses that only exist on paper. The conversation has even extended to the local level, with Seattle's City Council passing a bill 2 weeks ago that prohibits foreign influence corporations from contributing.
So, Jishnu, what campaigns and corporations specifically would be impacted?
Now, in terms of corporations, I'll hit you with 2 big ones, Uber and Amazon. Now, Uber will be prohibited by the fact that most of its boards, 10% of its board, are made up of foreign nationals. Amazon also actually falls under that category. But there's one other stipulation for Amazon actually that's relevant to New York State. It's the fact that many representatives, including the 24th District's own John Katko, received contributions from Amazon. Over the past 2 election cycles, Katko has received $4,000 worth of funding from Amazon. But the funny thing is, that's not even in his top 100 donors. Amazon falls behind other companies such as Anheuser-Busch, the brewery based in Belgium, which is listed as a foreign corporation and would thus be banned if this bill falls into effect. Now, that is a big if, since the state legislature has time to debate the budget which this act was proposed in, and they must reach a decision by April 1st.
All right, Jishnu Nair, thank you so much.
And the impeachment trial of President Donald Trump is currently underway in the Senate. After over 4 months, the president now faces trial for obstruction of Congress and abuse of power over allegations that the administration requested Ukrainian President Zelensky to interfere in the 2020 election. Here to break down the impeachment trial is Talking Points analyst Spencer Kweskin. Spencer, thank you so much for joining us. Now, first question today, Democrats have been laying out this case for impeachment for 3 days. They laid out this case. What was their case for impeachment? Tell us about it.
So the House Democrats opened with Adam Schiff actually saying this.
It looks like we're hitting some
the
technical difficulties
the
here.
basic gist of their argument was that they were going to take the evidence already shown within the House, and then they are going to explain it in a new light in the Senate. So they are pressuring for new witnesses, and they've actually got supplemental testimony from an aide to Vice President Mike Pence, actually approved by Chief Justice John Roberts. And they're also pressuring to get the John Bolton's report, which came out on Sunday, admitted into the Senate. So, and it looks like they're going to do that with Lindsey Graham, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, and Lisa Murkowski all signing on to give them the numbers needed to do that vote. They're also saying that Trump may cause them a lot more damage before the 2020 election by allowing Russia to influence. They also mentioned that high crimes don't have to be crimes in reference to the Bill Clinton impeachment trial. And they also talked about Rudy Giuliani and his involvement as impropriety.
Now, Spencer, since day one, Trump, in a very public sense, has completely denounced everything that has gone on with this. Much like the Mueller trial, he's called this a witch trial, or a witch hunt, rather. But what is the actual concrete legal defense here?
Yeah, that's basically Pat Cipollone and the administration's entire case, is that it's a fake trial and they had bad procedure throughout the entire thing, and they've launched a 6-part defense with this. The first part was that the transcripts show that the president never had connected aid recipients to, for example, an investigation with the Bidens or into a meeting. 2, the Ukrainian President Zelensky and other officials in Ukraine have said explicitly there is no quid pro quo. 3, Ukraine did not even know that the aid was halted until months after the phone call itself. 4, there was not a single witness that had firsthand knowledge within the House investigation that the president said that there was a specific connection. 5, the assistance flowed without actually any aid the aid was flowed without there was investigation or anything like that. And 6, Trump's a friend and supporter of Ukraine. Also today, Pam Bundy focused heavily on the Bidens and why the president chose to focus on them, and the administration has denied any and all knowledge and information within the Bolton report.
And obviously, there have been a couple questions looming over this entire trial. One of the big ones was whether or not witnesses were going to be called. How do you think that that's going to play out, and then the rest of the trial will unfold?
So specific witnesses and evidence have already been called. An aide to Mike Pence has already been submitted by John Roberts, and that's information that's going to be classified and shown to the senators only, but it's already been submitted. And also other aid, it depends on whether or not, and other evidence, it depends on whether or not Democrats can actually get 4 Republican senators to vote with them to allow the new evidence. So they've already got that for the Bolton report, it seems like, with Lindsey Graham, Lisa Murkowski, with Mitt Romney, and with Susan Collins.
Well, certainly a trial that seems to be falling on party lines. We'll have to see how it all shakes out. Spencer Queskin, thank you so much. Coming up, the Brexit saga continues as the withdrawal deadline approaches. What to watch for as that day draws closer.
And the spread of coronavirus reaches new dangerous levels. What you need to watch for when we come back.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation letter.
You're resigning.
Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you eat stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit.
I forgot. I'll do better. Please, don't quit on me.
Okay, but remember, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
Brexit withdrawal agreement cleared several hurdles this past week, passing through the British Parliament, receiving a stamp of approval from the Queen, and gaining the signatures of multiple EU leaders. These latest developments come as the official leave date sits just 4 days from now. Joining us now to discuss this is Talking Points analyst Augustus LaRue.
4 years in the making here. Brexit Day, as it's being called, is now just over the horizon this Friday, and several certainties are finally beginning to take shape. First, let's talk about the actual terms of that withdrawal agreement that was reached, starting with the repeal of the European Communities Act of 1972. What this will effectively mean is that the UK will eventually have to pull out of the European single market, losing access to free trade with the EU, which currently receives about 45% of the nation's exports. Now, there is room there, of course, to negotiate a free trade agreement later on, things similar to NAFTA or the USMCA, but ultimately they will not be able to be fully integrated into any European market. This repeal will also mean that the UK will no longer be held to the ruling of EU courts, one of the conditions most sought after by pro-Brexiteers, in addition to the agreement in addition to an agreement that stipulates a financial settlement of 35 billion euros paid to the EU by the UK to settle its prior obligations within the Union. Lastly, and arguably the most important detail here, is the legislation of what's being called the implementation period. Now, while the UK will officially be independent of the EU come January 31st, the implementation period is designed to have quite the opposite effect, at least until its expiration on December 31st of this year. Important to note, however, is that there is one final step before any of this is put into motion, and that is for the European Parliament to vote on the agreement this Wednesday. That being said, the overwhelming consensus among analysts is that we can expect withdrawal to be moving forward.
All right, so Augustus, it looks like Brexit is moving forward. You talked about this implementation period, saying it arguably is one of the most important parts of this. What is that implementation period going to look like?
Well, I think it would actually be more aptly called a transition period. Effectively, what it's going to do is narrow the blow of the effects that are immediately going to occur after Brexit Day arrives this Friday. Now, what that's going to mean is that despite officially being independent from the EU, the United Kingdom will still be under the jurisdiction of EU courts and will still, for a time being, fall within the single market of the European Union. Now, that, of course, will expire on December 31st, but it gives the UK time to adjust before it fully withdraws from the European Union.
Now, obviously we've heard a lot from the British perspective, leave, remain, and all of the debate that has gone on there, but what about the EU? How have other EU governments reacted to all this? I
would probably describe it overall with apprehension. Of course, throughout this entire process, we've heard misgivings of various European leaders, various European sentiments that, while are respectful of the UK's decision to leave the European Union, really see little benefit to the EU as a whole by the UK making this decision to withdraw.
And it sounds like we actually might be reaching the end of this Brexit saga, one that began back in 2016 with a referendum. Do you think this is actually the end? I mean, we've heard about this on and off for the past 4 years.
Oh, make no mistake, we are definitely within the final chapter of Brexit here, despite how long this implementation period might be. Assuming this vote goes through in the European Parliament and does pass and is signed into law, we're absolutely within the end of essentially this Brexit saga that's persisted for so many years now.
As you mentioned, better part of 4 years, debate over sort of hypotheticals. We'll have to see how it actually goes in concrete terms. Thank you so much, Augustus. There have been over 2,000 confirmed cases and over 80 deaths from the coronavirus, which first appeared in Wuhan, China last month. The virus is similar to pneumonia, which attacks the respiratory system. Talking Points analyst Oscar Offerman is here in studio to tell you everything that you need to know about the virus and how it spreads. Oscar?
Thanks, Connor. Now, since its discovery last month, the Wuhan coronavirus has spread to 13 places outside of mainland China, including other countries in East Asia, such as Japan, South Korea, Thailand, and Singapore, to name a few. The virus has also been confirmed in countries outside of the region, including the United States, Canada, France, and Australia. Now, the disease is highly contagious and can even spread from person to person before the discovery of symptoms. This particular version of coronavirus has never been seen before on this scale, but another virus in the same family, severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, ravaged China in 2003. Now, that outbreak infected more than 8,000 people worldwide and killed almost 800. Now, in response to the outbreak, China has locked down Wuhan and the surrounding area. A total population of 56 million people have been locked down. 1,000 U.S. citizens currently in Wuhan, with the last flight leaving for the U.S. tomorrow. Now, those passengers will be screened for the virus at a refueling stop in Anchorage, Alaska, at a terminal closed to the public before landing in Ontario, California, just outside of Los Angeles. Now, a total of 5 cases have been confirmed in the United States from people traveling back from China. Those confirmed cases in California, Arizona, Washington State, and Illinois. And closer to home, New York State officials are testing 4 patients suspected of having the virus. And this afternoon, the State Department and the CDC issued their highest travel warnings for Wuhan.
Now, Oscar, you mentioned those lockdowns of some massive populations in China. What other measures are Chinese officials taking to combat the spread of this virus?
Well, Chinese officials are really taking no chances here. The virus is obviously getting stronger, and the Chinese government has acknowledged this. If we're looking at the 2003 SARS virus that happened in China as an example, this virus has shown no signs of slowing down and can only go further.
So you talked about some measures China is taking to sort of contain this virus, but we do know it's already spread to other countries. So what are other countries doing to make sure that that doesn't continue spreading?
Well, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the State Department and the CDC issued their highest travel warnings. There are also screenings in the United States at major airports, including JFK, LAX, Atlanta, Chicago, O'Hare, to name just a few. And as I mentioned earlier, U.S. officials are really taking no chances with this. They're quarantining a massive amount of people in Anchorage, Alaska, closing the terminal for the entire civilian population and then landing them in California where there are no signs of the virus. Also in France, where 3 cases have been found in Paris, officials there have taken action as well.
Certainly looks like people are taking precaution, throughout the world. And last week in 2020, the World Economic Forum took place in Davos, Switzerland. The annual gathering hosts many of the world's wealthiest and most powerful people. Talking Points analyst Michael Fornari is here to tell us about President Trump's address to the group and what we can take away from this year's gathering. Michael?
This year's World Economic Forum focused on sustainability, with attendees discussing how business can flourish without disregarding the environment. Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce and Davos Staple, went as far as to say that the planet is a key stakeholder. During his address, President Trump presented a message of optimism, touting economic growth in the United States and around the world. Trump said, quote, "This is a time for optimism. Fear and doubt is not a good thought process. To embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse." End quote. During the week, business leaders echoed Trump's optimism and predicted the continuation of the current bull market. But the managing director of the World Economic Forum, Saadia Jahidi, said that internal studies by economists pointed to global social unrest and economic protest as the biggest threats to global growth in the near future. Perhaps then, it's no coincidence that this year's forum decided to devote so much attention to social issues in what it called, quote, stakeholder capitalism. Great business minds know how to identify trends. And in a global climate of protest, even the world's most successful businessmen turn their attention to more than the markets. Conor and Sabrina, back to you.
Michael Fornari, thank you. Coming up, the Iowa caucus is just 1 week away. We'll keep you updated on the latest polls in the Democratic presidential race.
And President Obama's U.S. waterway regulations are about to be overturned. We'll fill you in on the EPA rollback. Stick around.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
The Iowa caucus is just 1 week away, and the next 7 days are the last chance for candidates to get their message out before primary season officially begins. Some candidates need a strong finish in Iowa more than others.
Former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Senator Amy Klobuchar could all use a boost. National polls have all but Klobuchar thoroughly in contention. However, a lot of things can change depending on who wins in these early states.
In Iowa, the numbers look different. For starters, Senator Bernie Sanders leads the poll instead of Joe Biden. However, the next three candidates are all in a position to potentially win delegates.
However, the three senators in that group, Sanders, Warren, and Klobuchar, are all at a disadvantage this week. With the ongoing impeachment trial, none of them are available to hit the campaign trail. Now, Sabrina, that is something that could hurt them. At the end of the day, FaceTime with the candidates is something that I think a lot of people in the electorate appreciate. And although surely they'll have surrogates in Iowa and by extension New Hampshire if the Senate trial were to run that long, them not physically being in the state may hurt their chances in winning a few new voters.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, we know that surrogates are there sort of representing the candidates, but that FaceTime is really important. Candidates, especially in Iowa, are looking to make connections with the candidates before they sort of can figure out who they actually are going to ultimately support. We talk about Iowa, and you know that it is such an important race when it comes to momentum, but it's not necessarily always indicative of what's going to happen, who's going to win the nomination.
Right. We've seen two Republican primaries back-to-back, both in 2012 and 2016, where the Republican who won in Iowa did not go on to win the presidency. Now, that being said, Iowa is still important because for a lot of these candidates that maybe aren't up in the polls, it'll determine whether or not they drop out before New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency is set to overturn regulations on U.S. waterways put in place by President Obama. According to Politico, the Trump administration is implementing the largest rollback of the Clean Water Act since its passing in 1972 with the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. Under the new rule, about half of the country's wetlands and millions of miles of streams will lose federal protection. The Clean Water Act was originally designed to fine those that polluted protected waterways and required permits for actions like filling wetlands.
However, since its implementation, states and various industries have argued over which waterways can and should be federally protected. The EPA claims that the major rollback will help make things clear for farmers and states alike, but it's still likely to set off more lawsuits, this time from environmental groups. The EPA's own scientific consultants appointed by the Trump administration took issue with the new rule. According to a report drafted in December, the rule is in, quote, conflict with established science. Environmental groups have also voiced concerns that this could accelerate the loss of U.S. wetlands.
With that being said, as we mentioned, the Clean Water Act was originally designed to protect navigable waterways, but what that actually means in practice has been debated ever since its passing in the early 70s, with a lot of people claiming that it's really an issue where the federal government shouldn't be taking precedent over states, where the Trump administration is arguing here that states should really be taking the lead here.
Right, as you mentioned, this is an issue that has sort of been back and forth tied up in the courts. It actually made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court back in 2006. This Supreme Court case ended with Justice Kennedy really writing what became practice for the Navigable Waters Act, saying that, navigable waters are the waters that you should not be dredging material into. So something certainly that has continued to come up in court issues. And a Florida bill that would restrict abortion access to minors is heading to the Senate floor Wednesday. The bill would force teenagers under the age of 18 to get written and notarized parental permission before having abortions. If approved, physicians who perform abortions without parental consent could be charged with a third-degree felony. The act also criminalizes those who don't follow the state's Born Alive law, which extends right to infants born alive after an attempted abortion. Florida already has a requirement for parents to be notified before a child has an abortion, but the consent law requires express permission.
Both the current notification law and the proposed consent bill contain a judicial bypass process. In the new bill, this would allow teens to petition circuit courts for a waiver in order to have abortions without parental consent. The issue is one that has split the Senate along party lines, with Democrats saying it's an erosion of abortion rights that will increase unsafe abortions, while Republicans say that the legislation is actually designed to protect minors. Wednesday, senators from both sides of the aisle will get to ask questions about the bill, but a final vote on the measure won't come up till next week.
All right, Connor, obviously this is a very partisan issue. It's something that, again, like the EPA protections, has been tied up in the courts a couple times. In Florida court, for example, 1988, Florida heard a case on this, and actually the rules to privacy ended up sort of curtailing that case.
Agreed, and Florida is joining a few red states, particularly Ohio, Georgia, Alabama, just to name a few, that could potentially be passing these new laws in order to get a challenge for Roe v. Wade all the way in the Supreme Court in D.C. So we'll have to see how that goes, whether or not it makes it that far up the court system.
And when we come back, we'll sit down with Natalie Fahmy to talk about potential peace talks between Israel and Palestine. Stick around.
Fifth World Holocaust Forum. There, he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli opposition leader Benny Gantz.
Pence officially announced that Netanyahu and Gantz would be making the trip to Washington to talk Israel-Palestine peace plans. Just yesterday, they traveled to Washington, and today and tomorrow will be in the White House meeting with President Trump.
Here to tell us more about the peace plans and what to expect is Talking Points analyst Natalie Fahmy. Now, Natalie, what can you tell us about the meeting that they had today?
Okay, so I can tell you the meeting that they had today. They went in. Netanyahu was very focused on the peace plans. He's very excited about what's going to be coming out of this, whereas Gantz, he went into the meeting and he thought, you know what, like, I'm worried about the peace plans, but I'm going to focus more so on making a good relation between me and President Trump. And at the end of the meeting, Netanyahu and Trump actually had a brief interview, and Netanyahu described this peace plan as a chance to make history.
So what can you tell us about Israeli and Palestinian reactions to this plan?
So Israeli people are very excited about it. They think that the plan is going to be great, but Palestinians not so much. They think the White House is very unfairly biased towards Israel, and they actually already came out and denounced the plan. They said that they won't support it, and a Palestinian official came out just a few days ago and said that no single Palestinian would ever accept this plan.
Now, if we take a step back before either Netanyahu or Gantz arrived in the U.S., what did their attitudes look like towards a potential meeting with President Trump before they got here?
Right, so Netanyahu was very excited for this plan. Again, he thinks it's a chance to make history, and he also thinks this is something that's really going to help him win his third election coming up in less than a year. Whereas Gantz, again, he's not very focused on making the peace plans. He's more so focused on creating a good relation between him and Trump. Gantz planned to go into the meeting on Monday and return home afterwards, whereas Netanyahu is staying Monday and Tuesday, and will be talking with Trump.
And Netanyahu's going to be meeting Trump tomorrow, so do you know what we can expect coming out of that meeting? Any ideas?
Yeah, so actually they're going to continue talking peace plans tomorrow, and then afterwards they're going to make joint remarks. And after the joint remarks, they are expected to announce the peace plan officially. So we can see that coming. We're still not exactly sure where Palestine is coming. Trump hasn't spoken to Palestine exactly about these peace plans, but that's something else we can be looking for tomorrow.
Well, finding peace in that region has been a project of every U.S. president for years to come, so we'll have to see how this all materializes. Natalie, thank you so much. Well, that's all the time we have tonight on Talking Points. For more content and webisodes, be sure to visit CitrusTV.com. For all of us here, I'm Conor Wight.
And I'm Sabrina Maggiore. Have a great night, Syracuse.